My next guest is completely comfortable saying that his argument should hold more weight than most people's, including, in all likelihood, yours and mine. Tom Nichols' new book is called The Death of Expertise, the campaign against established knowledge and why it matters. He argues that the rise of the internet has helped make people a little more informed and a lot more confident in their own opinions. Or as he puts it, we're seeing a Google-fueled, Wikipedia-based blog-sodden collapse of any division between professionals and laymen. So where does that leave us? And what happens when the experts get it wrong? Tom Nichols joins me now. He's also a national security professor at the U.S. Naval War College and a 5-time Jeopardy champion, so he is rarely wrong. Tom, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And it's very cool to see you in person. I see your face all the time on Twitter, so thank you for coming in to talk about your book. Let's get a definition of the death of expertise on the table first, because you do not mean that we no longer have legitimate experts in different areas. What do you mean?
It's really the death of the idea of expertise, of relying on experts. There will always be experts. There are always going to be people who know how to do surgery or know how to negotiate a treaty or know how to defend you in a courtroom. And there will always be some question about, when you have a client or a patient, they're going to have questions. What's different now is that people reject the idea that those people know any more than anybody else. It's not that they question their doctor or they question a diplomat. They want to replace them. They say, I know as much as that person does.
All right. You identify a few different factors that have led to this phenomenon. You see, we mentioned at the outset the role that the internet is playing. So how have the internet and social media contributed to what you just described?
Well, it's interesting. I think most people, if you tell them about this phenomenon, they'd say, well, it's the internet, right? Because everybody can look up everything and we're all instantly smart because we carry these little answer boxes in our pocket. The phenomenon itself predates the internet, I argue, but the internet has really put it on steroids. And social media has put it on mean steroids. It's not just that people think they're learning everything they need to know from the internet, but the anonymity of social media makes people really mean and argumentative about it. And I think that that's added to this problem in general.
All right, so let's just try to come up with an internet-driven case study. I know that if I am suffering some mysterious ailment, I can read about said ailment on WebMD or somewhere else, and then I can go into my doctor's office, and when he or she suggests a prognosis, I can say, well, what about this? Or have you considered this other option? Are there other ways that we see technology exacerbating the questioning of experts that you say predated the rise of the net?
Absolutely, and doctors actually have a word for that, an expression for that. They call it paging Dr. Google. That's when they talk to a patient, and then the patient says, well, I read, and among themselves, doctors call that the problem of paging Dr. Google. But as I was writing the book, and it was based on an article I'd written earlier, people started to write to me, and I was getting letters from doctors, lawyers, people in diplomatic service, military people. My favorite was actually a molecular biologist in France who said, I loved your piece, can I translate it? Because people argue with me about molecular biology.
Really?
Yes.
Ordinary men and women say
Ordinary people say, let me explain. That's what drove me to write the book was, as a Russia specialist, as an expert in Russian affairs, increasingly what I found was not that people were asking me about Russia, they were saying, let me explain Russia to you.
Now, I assume people were saying that in large part in the context of our just concluded or fairly recently concluded presidential election, or did it
It actually started during the Snowden affair when we were talking about Russia's role in this, or what I was arguing was Russia's role, and people were saying to me, Tom, let me explain Russia to you. And of course now it's happening over again and over again with the Russian influence on the election and the Russian profile.
But well, I'm just a little wink and nod right there.
I should add that my views don't represent those in the Naval War College.
Understood, and a good does nor do mine represent all of WGBH as an institution. Let me ask you about other non-technological factors. Talk about campus culture, right? You talk about a shifting media landscape more broadly speaking. What role does campus culture play, do you think?
Well, over time, I think university life has become very client-centered at a lot of American universities, that the most important thing is that students are happy, that their grades are high, that they stay with the program, and this means that increasingly students are very comfortable lecturing their faculty. We see this all the time of where students explain. Just the other day in social media, there was an interesting case where a student was talking about a reading that she felt her professor simply didn't understand and should never have assigned to her because, the professor just doesn't understand as much as the student. And I think there's always that temptation. I mean, that's part of adolescence. That's part of being a young adult. It's important to question your teachers. But again, the phenomenon of the death of expertise is that the students are stepping forward and saying, I actually know more about this than the teachers on day one.
Before we talk about the role of maybe 24/7 cable news, let's take a look at an example of the extent to which citizens can be uninformed despite all the information we have at our fingertips. Here's a little clip from a segment that Jimmy Kimmel did asking people about a great big public policy issue.
Which plan do you support, Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act?
The Affordable Care Act.
And why do you not agree with the Affordable Care Act?
Well, I think it's not really available for all.
So the Affordable Care Act is more affordable than Obamacare?
Just the name says it all.
Right.
All right, so what about cable news? This is late night, obviously. What role does having people shouting at each other on TV 24 hours a day, 7 days a week play?
That's a huge part of it. And part of the reason that you have all those people shouting at each other is because there's now so much bandwidth available that networks have to fill that time. And they can fill that time by appealing to niche audiences. So instead of 3 newscasts, or 4, if you count PBS, even back in the old days, that people can now watch anything at any moment. We don't have a national ritual of watching 3 or 4 news broadcasts at 6 or 6:30 where we all get the same view of the news. And that's actually a good thing. There is more diversity in the sources of news, but it also means that people graze to find the things they actually want to hear. They don't listen to the news, they don't watch the news, they cherry pick the news, and every network can tailor that stream to a particular kind of demographic.
I alluded to President Trump's tweet from earlier today about all things Russian being a hoax. The president, in his campaign, made sort of a joyful reference to his fondness for people who did not have good education. So let's take a look at what he had to say on the campaign trail.
We won with highly educated. We won with poorly educated. I love the poorly educated.
How does President Trump fit into this story that you're telling, which seems to me to have culprits across the ideological spectrum?
There are culprits across the ideological spectrum, but unfortunately the president is the loudest voice in the room. He's the president of the United States. He ran against experts, in addition to loving the poorly educated.
And not only that, his victory was a rebuttal or repudiation of all the experts who said he couldn't win.
Right, and as people approach expertise, they think that getting that wrong means that you're wrong about everything else, of course. But the president was very clear. I don't like experts. Well, I don't need them. What good are they? They've made nothing but mistakes. And I think the worst thing he did was to scapegoat experts, because I think he's finding, as president, as every president does, you can't run a government without experts.
All right, Tom Nichols, we got to leave it there. The book is The Death of Expertise, The Campaign Against Established Knowledge and Why It Matters.